The RV park business has spent 20 years being treated as the embarrassing cousin of real estate. Underbuilt, underpriced, photographed only when something is on fire. And yet a well-run RV park generates more gross revenue per acre than the same acreage would generate as residential property tax base against an asset that trades at roughly a tenth of what it would cost to build new. The institutional consolidator currently buying every park he can find understands this. The seller does not. This is the part of the conversation the asset class deserves and has not gotten. Let me walk you through it. A modern RV park, of the kind that has been built in the last 15 years, is somewhere between 25 and 70 acres. It contains between 80 and 300 pads, depending on density and the specific build quality of the original developer. Each pad rents for between $45 and $150 a night during peak season, between $30 and $80 a night during shoulder season, and between $300 and $1,200 a month if the park accommodates long-term tenants. The math on paper is uninteresting. The math in practice is not what the paper says. Here is the per-acre comparison that nobody runs. A 30-acre RV park with 180 pads, running a blended average of $65 a pad night at 65% annualized occupancy, generates roughly $2.5 million a year in gross revenue. $2.5 million on 30 acres of land. $83,000 per acre per year of gross rent. A 30-acre suburban residential subdivision, at 30 units per acre allowed under most municipal entitlement, generates property tax revenue for the municipality of approximately $15,000 per acre per year. The RV park generates more gross revenue per acre of land than the same parcel would generate property tax revenue for the city. A new RV park costs roughly $1 to $4 million per acre to build today. The existing stock that is changing hands trades at between $100,000 and $300,000 per acre. The asset class trades, in other words, at roughly a tenth of what it would cost to put back in place. And it trades against a gross income stream that the same acreage in any other entitlement would not come close to producing. The mispricing, on the only honest comparison available, is roughly a factor of 10. The reason it is mispriced is the second most important fact in the asset class. Almost nobody is building new RV parks. The reason almost nobody is building new RV parks is that municipal zoning, in roughly 80% of American municipalities with the kind of recreation and infrastructure base that would actually support a park, does not allow them. The land use is treated by zoning boards as a hybrid of trailer park and commercial campground, both of which are politically toxic categories in suburban planning. A new park requires a special use permit. The special use permit requires public hearings. The public hearings are attended by every homeowner within a 3-mile radius, and the homeowners are uniformly opposed because the asset class is associated, in the imagination of suburban America, with the kind of person they would prefer to live somewhere else. The supply of RV parks in the United States is therefore roughly fixed at around 8,700 properties, give or take. Some close every year. Almost no new ones open. The closures are mostly older parks owned by retiring operators who cannot find a buyer because the parks were built to a 1970s standard with 30-amp electrical and no sewer hookup at most pads. And the parks that close are converted to other land uses where the zoning permits it. The net of supply each year is mildly negative. The demand for RV pads, on the other hand, has done the opposite thing for the last 20 years. The RV ownership population in the United States has grown from roughly 7 million units in 2005 to roughly 12 million units in 2026. The full-time RV residency population, the people who actually live in their RV year-round, has roughly tripled in the same period. The seasonal snowbird population, the retirees who follow the weather, is the largest single demand cohort by spend. There is more demand chasing a roughly fixed supply, which is the structural condition for cash flow expansion that almost no other commercial real estate asset class currently has. Now, to the mechanism that makes the asset class actually load-bearing as a retirement investment. The standard pitch deck for an RV park describes it as a hospitality business. Hospitality businesses are seasonal, are vulnerable to operational excellence, are labor-intensive, and have ugly revenue curves. The seasonal occupancy curve at most parks looks roughly like 90% in July, 80% in May and September, 60% in October and April, and somewhere between 15 and 40% in January and February depending on geography. If the asset were genuinely a hospitality asset, the average occupancy of 65% would be a serious operational risk. The asset is not genuinely a hospitality asset. The asset is, increasingly, a landlord business in a hospitality costume. The rare landlord whose tenant arrives with the building and who, accordingly, depreciates none of it. Roughly 40 to 60% of pads at a well-run RV park are occupied on a long-term basis. The pad is rented by the month rather than the night. The tenant is a full-time RV resident, often a retiree on Social Security supplemented with savings, sometimes a working contractor in transit, occasionally a household that simply could not afford the rent on a conventional apartment in the local market and concluded that an RV pad at $600 a month was better than the alternatives. The long-term tenant pays less per night than the seasonal tourist. The long-term tenant also pays every month, which the seasonal tourist does not. The result is that the actual revenue curve of a well-run park looks much less like the hospitality average and much more like a multi-family apartment building, except that the per square foot rent compares favorably to a multi-family apartment building because the tenant brought their own structure. The owner is renting dirt and electricity and water and a sewer hookup. The tenant is providing the entire residential improvement. The owner pays for none of the depreciation on the residential improvement. The owner sets a rate that captures roughly 70% of the comparable per square foot rent of a multifamily building, with none of the capital expenditure of a multifamily building. The operating margins are accordingly larger. This is the part of the asset class the seller does not understand because the seller bought the asset in 1987 when it actually was just a hospitality business and ran it that way for 39 years. The buyer who is paying attention has discovered the multifamily fringe mechanic and is acquiring underpriced parks based on the model the seller is not pricing the asset off of. The single institutional consolidator currently running this play has acquired roughly 250 to 400 RV parks over the past decade and is reportedly continuing to acquire at a pace of 1 to 2 parks a month. The acquisition thesis is unambiguous. He is buying retiring operator parks at hospitality multiples and operating them at multifamily fringe margins. The valuation arbitrage between the two pricing models on a 30-acre property is roughly $4 to $9 million on a $5 million acquisition. He is, in plain terms, paying a hospitality multiple price for an asset he then operates at multifamily fringe margins the prior owner did not know were on the table. If you are a retirement age buyer, this is also the asset class where the small buyer arbitrage still exists. The institutional consolidator does not buy parks under $3 to $4 million in transaction size because his cost of acquisition and management does not justify smaller deals. The under $3 million segment of the market, which is most of the market, is dominated by retirement age sellers selling to other retirement age buyers at the wrong price. Almost none of these buyers have heard of the multifamily fringe model. There is also a small set of operators in the under $3 million segment who have figured out the multifamily fringe model independently of the institutional consolidator. They are typically second-generation operators whose parents bought the park in the 1980s and whose children, returning home with a finance education, ran the numbers and realized the asset had been mispriced by their own family for 30 years. They have spent the past decade buying adjacent parks at retiring operator prices and rolling them up into small regional portfolios. They are, in plain terms, the early-stage version of the institutional consolidator. Several of them, in interviews with regional industry publications, have stated openly that they expect to be acquired by the larger consolidator within the next 5 to 7 years. The cap rate compression they anticipate is the same one referenced earlier. The sewer and water infrastructure of an RV park and the absence of either is the second most mispriced variable in this asset class after the multifamily fringe occupancy mix. A park built before 1990 typically has 30-amp electrical only, no individual sewer connection at most pads, and a single shared sanitation dump station that serves the entire property. A park built after 2010 typically has 50-amp electrical individual sewer connections at every pad, and a wastewater treatment plant or municipal connection that supports the modern long-term tenant population. The older park is unattractive to the long-term tenant segment because almost no current generation RV can operate at 30 amps. The older park therefore runs at 90% seasonal tourist mix and never converts to multifamily fringe economics. The newer park converts cleanly. The cost of upgrading an older park to 50-amp electrical and individual sewer is between $15,000 and $40,000 per pad. On a 180-pad property, that is between $2.7 and $7.2 million in capital expenditure. A retiring operator seller will not have done this upgrade in the trailing 3 decades. The acquiring buyer will either inherit a 30-amp park that cannot be converted to multifamily fringe at acceptable cost, or will need to allocate 8 to 15% of the acquisition price toward the upgrade in year 1 or 2. This is the part of the due diligence the brokerage industry does not feature prominently in the listing summary. The current electrical and sewer infrastructure either supports the multifamily fringe model or does not. The seller, in most cases, does not actually know which is the case at his own park because he has never run the multifamily fringe model and does not know what the model requires. The buyer must independently determine this through site inspection by a competent contractor who can read the original 1987 site plan and tell the buyer what the electrical and sewer load actually is, what the modern requirement is, and what the gap costs to close. A separately important variable is the regional weather pattern. Parks in the Sunbelt operate at significantly higher full-time long-term tenant ratios because the snowbird population is structural. Parks in the Northeast and Upper Midwest operate at lower long-term tenant ratios because the winter is uninhabitable. A snowbird corridor park in Arizona, Florida, or southern Texas can run at 70 to 80% long-term tenant occupancy. A Pennsylvania or Wisconsin park, in contrast, runs at 20 to 35% and is structurally a hospitality business. The multifamily fringe arbitrage is most concentrated in the Sunbelt. The retiring buyer who deploys capital into a Sunbelt park is buying into a different asset class than the retiring buyer who deploys capital into an Upper Midwest park, even though the brochure language is identical. What does a 30-acre RV park actually cost to run? Operating expenses at a 30-acre, 180-pad park run between 38 and 46% of revenue at a well-managed property. That breaks down roughly as 10 to 12% payroll, 6 to 8% utilities, 3 to 5% property tax, 2 to 4% insurance, 6 to 8% maintenance and reserves, 4 to 6% advertising and reservation software, and 3 to 5% miscellaneous, including legal, accounting, and the occasional septic system repair. Net operating income on a $2.5 million gross is therefore between $1.35 and $1.55 million. On a $5 million acquisition, that is a 27 to 31% cap rate. Almost no commercial real estate asset class currently trades at a 27% cap rate. The reason this one does is that the actual cap rate is calculated from the multifamily fringe model, which the seller is not selling against and the market has not priced in. The institutional consolidator buys at headline cap rates of 16 to 20% and operates them at 27 to 31. The retiring operator seller does not understand the spread. The retiring buyer who reads this video, in principle, now does. The named retirement that did not end well in this asset class when it occurs is roughly always the same story. A buyer pays a hospitality business price for a park and operates it as a hospitality business. He hires a campground manager, runs a reservation system, and treats the asset as a seasonal income stream. Year 3, occupancy is 53%, revenue is $1.5 million. Operating costs are 48%, and net operating income is $780,000. On a $4 million acquisition, that is a 19.5% cap rate, which sounds fine, except that the buyer is now 68, manages the park 7 days a week from March through October, takes November and February off, and has discovered that the campground manager is also his mailman because there is no actual full-time labor market for the position in the regional area where the park is located. He sells the park at year 7 for slightly less than he paid. Having lived through 5 seasons of operational labor he did not understand he was signing up for, and considers the outcome a successful early retirement adjustment. This is, in fairness, also a fine outcome. The asset class will reliably produce a hospitality-grade return if it is operated as a hospitality business. The point is that the same asset with the same physical footprint will produce a multifamily-grade return if it is operated under a different model. Almost no retiring buyer does this on his own. The 68-year-old retiring physician with $3 million to deploy is the buyer this market is genuinely underpriced for, if and only if he is willing to do 2 specific things at acquisition. The first is to underwrite the park on the multifamily fringe model rather than the hospitality model. That is a forensic accounting exercise, not a brochure reading exercise. The second is to install, in year 1, a full-time on-site couple managing the property in a residence on-site arrangement that converts the asset from the buyer's hands-on operational business to the buyer's hands-off owned asset position. The full-time couple costs $80,000 to $120,000 a year all in, including their residence. The conversion takes 6 to 12 months. After it is complete, the asset is genuinely passive, and the cap rate remains in the high teens. The cap rate compression that has not yet happened in this asset class is what will happen when institutional capital fully prices in the multifamily fringe model. The currently active acquirer is the lead edge of exactly that repricing, one park at a time. So back to the cold open paradox. The RV park business has spent 20 years being treated as the embarrassing cousin of real estate. The per-acre cash flow says otherwise. The supply-demand balance points to the same conclusion. The multifamily fringe pricing model, looked at honestly, gets to a third answer the seller is not pricing for. The asset class is, on the math, genuinely mispriced. The asset will also reliably produce a hospitality-grade return if it is operated as a hospitality business. That outcome is fine. Most retiring buyers settle there because the multifamily fringe upside is gated by 2 things they do not, on entering the deal, bring to the table. The first is the forensic accounting capacity to underwrite the park on the model the seller is not selling against. The second is the willingness, in year 1, to install a full-time on-site couple in a residence on-site arrangement at $80,000 to $120,000 a year and to step out of the operator chair entirely. The institutional consolidator currently acquiring parks at hospitality multiples treats the accountant and the on-site couple as the baseline cost of doing business. The seller still does not. Whether the retiring buyer is closer to the consolidator or to the seller on those 2 specific operational facts is the question that decides which version of the return he ends up with. An expensive retirement. The math on this one naturally declines to congratulate you, but does for once take your side.